Sorry to interrupt. If you just press your microphone. Thank you.
I do apologise. I'll start again. Right, good morning everybody. I'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Police and Crime Panel, including the Commissioner and her team, and any members of the public who are present or watching the live stream at home. Have we received any apologies?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Aston, Councillor Spencer, Councillor Jones and one of our independent members, Brian Tadeo.
Thank you. Before we go into the agenda proper, I would just like to announce that some panel members will be aware that a member of the public has made a recent request for urgent business to be considered by the panel at this meeting. I've taken advice on the matter, and taking into account the subject matter of the requested urgent business as chair, I've made the judgment that it would be inappropriate for the panel to consider this business in detail, as it does not fall within the remit of this panel. Having said that, it's important that we now move on to the main business of the agenda, so we can make a start with agenda item 1, which you'll find at pages 1 to 10, which are the minutes of the last meeting. If anyone has any objections to the minutes from the last meeting on the 8th of July 2021 being received as a correct record, please indicate that you wish to speak by pressing the right-hand button on the microphone in front of you. As there are no indications to speak in objection, it will be recorded that the minutes are agreed. Thank you, colleagues. If you turn to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest?
No declarations of interest, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3A, which is the first 100 days in office, which you'll find at pages 11 to 26 on your agenda. Our first item is the Merseyside Police and Crime Commissioner's report on their first 100 days in office, and I'd like to invite the Commissioner to take us through the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think we've got a little video to play, if that's okay, and then I'll go through the detail of the report. Thank you for that. I just thought that was useful to share with you in case you hadn't seen it on social media and things. You'll remember from my comments from last time around trying to be visible and kind of accessible, and a big part of that is the digital kind of side of things, so we've tried to be as engaging as possible. So I just thought it was useful to show you that, just to kind of give you a snapshot really of some of the work that we've done. Obviously the report itself does have a lot more detail in there. I'm happy to answer any questions. There's a big focus around the visibility. You know, again, one of my priorities was about being visible and proactive. COVID has made that slightly challenging in terms of being able to go out and actually have conversations in person and meet some of these the various community organisations that I've been speaking to, but we have done lots of online consultations, and obviously as things have started to open up, we've been going out as well and meeting people face to face. So lots of information there about who I've been speaking to, and obviously as well the focus around the funding. That was another key priority for me. in terms of trying to actually draw down as much investment as we possibly can. And you'll have seen from the video there, it said 3.3 million, but I think we're now up to about 3.45 million. It's the most recent figure. So lots of kind of positive news stories in terms of actually trying to get that funding into Merseyside and into some of those frontline services. So yeah, happy to take any questions about any of the detail of the report.
Thank you, Commissioner. Oh, I beg your pardon. Thank you, Commissioner. I'll shortly ask for any questions or comments. Firstly, could I remind panel members to use the right-hand button on the microphone if you wish to speak, and I'll bring you in. Also, please remember to press the right-hand side button of the microphone once you are satisfied your question or point has been responded to. So I have in the list, I've got Councillor Les Rollands.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Good morning, Commissioner. Nice to meet you at last. I find it really refreshing, your plan. I think it was a great report. I also feel it's excellent, your thoughts on your connection with the public and so forth. How are you going to, in future, develop that engagement with the public? Outlined in your plan, and how will it be funded? And what, if anything, that the previous commissioner did, would you improve on?
It's a good question. So I have I have a community engagement team, because one of the challenges I think with this role is that there's over 1.5 million people, I think, across Merseyside, 50 constituencies, 105 different council wards. So one of the challenges I have is how I can get out there and speak to as many people as possible. So I have a really great community engagement team, and there's a staff member that covers each borough. So they do a lot of work on my behalf where I might not be able to get there. So they will meet with lots of the community organisations, they will speak with local councillors, they will kind of be a bit of a link for me to let me know what's happening on the ground. But obviously, in addition to that, I am very keen to get out and do lots of walkabouts. I've set myself a bit of a target around trying to visit every council ward in the next couple of years. You know, having been a councillor myself, I know the role that councillors play, and I know the diversity that we have across Merseyside. So I'm very keen to come out and work with yourselves and do walkarounds in terms of the council areas. And then, to be honest, it's just to try and see what's going on. There's been a host of community events. There's lots of things that have been postponed that are now starting to happen. I'm putting as many of them in my diary as I can, just to try and get out there and speak to people and meet people. We're still doing lots of online, consultations and online kind of chats and conversations to make sure that if, they aren't quite ready to do it in person, we're still having that conversation. So really, it's just about fitting in as much as I can within my diary to get out and speak to people and see what's going on.
Okay. I just have a quick follow-up, Chair. Yes. Yeah, thanks for that, Commissioner. I worry a little bit whether this is just a flush of bloom, you wanting to meet the people and this might fade away. Is this something that you want to really carry on to the year and make sure that it is funded and make sure that that connection with the public is kept?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you ask my team, they would probably tell you that they're already struggling to find time in the diary because I've said I want to make sure that these visits happen. It's important, I think, for me to stay in touch with the public to make sure that when I'm having those conversations with the police that I'm up to speed with what the community concerns are. So yes, I wanted to make a big impact. I wanted to make sure that people could see that I was visible, but it's absolutely not going to stop now. I'm very keen to keep those visits going as long as I can.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Murray.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to thank the Commissioner for the report and for meeting with Liverpool City Council elected members. And I just wonder, because I think you've been meeting right across all the authorities, if any key issues have come directly from those meetings, please?
Yeah, it's a good question. The big issue, and I think we spoke about it at the last panel meeting, is around that visibility and that engagement with the police. As I've said, I think you as local councillors have a really good understanding of what's going on, and I think a lot of the feedback has been you want to have that direct connection. You want to know who your local officer is. You want to be able to raise concerns in a really kind of proactive and efficient way. And so those are some of the things that I've been flagging up with the police. But yeah, that seems to be the pattern, is that communities want that visibility. They want to see police out on the streets, and that's why I've included it so much within my plan.
Thanks for that answer. I would also comment that in my ward we've noticed that visibility increasing in the last few months, so that's welcome. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'll feed that back. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ossendeko.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to applaud our PCC on the way she has effectively utilised digital engagement. I mean, I find most of the content on your social media very engaging, and that's really, really commendable. And I think it's a move in the right direction. I'd like to know how your office intends to encourage the police to further utilise digital tools to improve policing. And you said something about walkabouts. Is that something you started, or is that something you intend to go into? Thank you.
Yes, so in terms of the walkabout, so I've already done a few various walkabouts across various boroughs with different councillors, and as I say, my intent is to try and do as many as possible with any councillors who want me to come with them. So if there is a request, please do let me know, because I'm very happy to do that, and I will carry that on because I want to try and get to every ward if I can, all 105. In terms of the digital engagement, my comms person will be very pleased to know that that's going down well. We are working hard. It's probably an area where we still need to invest a little bit because we don't always have the capacity to be able to do as much digital engagement as we want. In terms of Merseyside Police, yes, to be honest, they're very good already. They have a much bigger comms team, but they are very alive to the fact that a lot of people are operating online. So, for example, up in Sefton, they did some really great work where people online were chatting about a potential rave that was due to happen and kind of the issues around antisocial behaviour and some of the concerns that were being raised. The police were already active in those Facebook groups, having those conversations, picked up those concerns, and were able to then respond kind of very proactively. So actually, Merseyside Police, I think, are very good, and they are very aware that they need to have a digital presence because that's where a lot of people are at the minute. So I think, they'll definitely be making sure that presence is there.
Thank you. Councillor Smeeder.
Good morning, Commissioner. I'd just like to ask you a question. Mine's on the funding streams, if that's okay. And more specifically on page 15 of your report regarding domestic abuse for perpetrator programmes.
Sorry, Chair. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there seems to be a problem with the queuing system at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the queuing system and put Councillor Smeaton's microphone on so that people at home can hear. And if other people still want to ask a question, then for them to press their microphone to get back into the queuing system.
Thanks for that. Do you need the councillor to repeat his question?
Yes, that'll be great. I'm just going to clear the queuing system and then I'll give you the go-ahead when it's time to speak. Thank you. Councillor Smeaton, if you could press your microphone.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Thanks, Commissioner. Mine was on the funding stream, and obviously page 15 of your report was domestic abuse for perpetrator programmes. I'd just like a little bit more clarification on that, if possible, please.
Yeah, so this was a specific bid that we put into the Home Office for domestic abuse perpetrator programmes, and there were three different strands to it. So there was an element around the traditional kind of view of domestic abuse and putting programmes in place to rehabilitate perpetrators in terms of spousal abuse and partner abuse. But it also identified a couple of areas around stalking. And now stalking is a very underreported issue and actually incredibly dangerous. And I think we're probably not quite doing enough around that. So we're really keen to make sure that we got some support in place around stalking. And then the other one as well was around child on parent abuse. And actually, of the domestic homicides that we had here on Merseyside, 2 of them out of the 13, I think it is, were children murdering their parents. So it is an issue that we don't necessarily talk about a lot, but there obviously is a real issue there in terms of how do we manage that. I am very keen to make sure that we are constantly fighting for more funding for victims because I feel like we've still got a big gap there. But I think we do have to acknowledge that if we want to stop it from the outset, we need to look at perpetrator support and look at what programmes we can put in place. So this was an opportunity, I think, to try and draw down some additional funding specifically for perpetrators and look at how we can try and, stop some of these incidents happening before you get to that stage.
Sure, can I ask a supplementary question?
Yes.
Just about access to the funding, how do you get access, how do communities get access to that funding?
So the communities get access to it. Well, it was a bidding process. So I have a commissioning team who put the calls out to all the various agencies across Merseyside and say, this is an opportunity, this is the bid, and we then work with them to put the kind of bid together about what it is that we could deliver, how much it would cost, and then we submit that then on behalf of the organisations to the Home Office, and then the Home Office make the decision around what is funded and what isn't. That isn't the same for every bid process, but for that one, I think that was the process.
Thank you. Councillor Rollands.
Thanks, Commissioner. I mentioned, I noticed in the report you've got a staffing review, i.e. deputy. Can you give me more details on the timescale of that and how wide will the staffing review go, apart from the deputy?
Yes, so the staffing review, I mentioned this at the last meeting and I'm still trying to pin down exactly what it's going to look like. I've identified a few key areas where I think we need to invest in the office. So particularly around the digital comms that we talked about, the scrutiny role, I think is something I want to expand on, and so I'm keen that we get some kind of dedicated specialist support around scrutiny and somebody who's going to manage that process. So I've identified that. The violence against women and girls work is another area which is, will be a priority for me, and I think needs a real focus. I already have somebody in post doing the domestic abuse workplace champion scheme, and so my intention is to try and expand their role a bit more. And then the final one is around income generation. So all the money that we've just been talking about, that comes from my team proactively putting bids together, and then working with organisations to get that money in. The challenge we have is around the capacity to then be able to monitor the contracts effectively to make sure we get out of those contracts what we've asked for. So one of the priorities is around an income generation officer who will be able to focus on pulling down that funding, and we will then be able to use some of the income streams to cover the cost of that role so it doesn't come off the bottom line, if that makes sense. Yeah. But then they will be able to focus on getting the money in, and then the rest of the team will be able to make sure that we're managing the contracts effectively. So those are the 4 areas that I'm thinking of. We're currently working through with HR around the budget and the figures, and and work out actually practically how we do that. So I can certainly come back to the panel once I've finalised that, but that's my current thinking. And I suppose the only other thing to mention as well is that obviously I think you'll be aware now that Clive, my chief exec, is moving on. So I think as part of that conversation I'll be looking to bring in an interim in the initial stage, and so I'll probably have a conversation with them as well, because the chief exec is the person who runs the office. So I'll probably wait and have a conversation with them in terms of, is the office in the right place, and is there anything else we need to invest in or shuffle around a bit. So it'll probably be a bit of an ongoing conversation, if I'm honest, but those are the initial areas that I've identified. I think we need some investment.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Councillor Murray.
Oh yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair. Commissioner, I would like to welcome the additional funding around domestic abuse and sexual violence, but I have a few questions. Is this a one-off uplift? And if it is, how long will the funding continue for? And how are we going to measure the impact of the additional funding in terms of monitoring and evaluation? I think it's crucial that if it is funding for several years, that we learn quickly where the best spend is. Thank you.
Yeah, so unfortunately, well, there's a couple of different pots there around domestic abuse. The majority of them were one-off pots of funding, which is, a continuing frustration of mine, because you can't get sustainability in a service if you don't give that longer-term support. So the vast majority were one-off. The specific funding around the IDVAs and the ISVAs, so the domestic abuse advocates and the sexual violence advocates, that was 2-year funding. So we have got a little bit more sustainability for that. It's a conversation I'm still having with the Home Office, because, as I say, it's very hard to plan longer term. What I would really like to happen is for the additional funding to be included within my Ministry of Justice grant I get around victims, because as part of that process we do a very thorough kind of needs analysis. We work out where the need is. We then look at, we invite tenders, and ask for bids from organisations, and then we do that monitoring. So we look exactly at that. How many individuals have you supported? What's the impact been? What are the outcomes of that support? How long have you needed to support them for? All of those issues. But at the minute, I know we haven't got enough funding to be able to give them the right capacity to be able to help all the individuals that are waiting on their lists. So my hope is that we'll get that. Well, they'll try and roll some of this additional funding future years into the actual grant, so it then becomes part of that whole monitoring and evaluation process.
Yeah, I think as well, if quite a bit of it is one-off pots of money, the outcomes of those individual initiatives become more important as evidence for getting future funding.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, no, it does, absolutely. And I think, to be honest, having spoken to some of the domestic abuse organisations, the additional funding is really just to remove people from their waiting lists. So I think the evidence of the impact of the support they give, I think, is well evidenced. So it's really just about being able to expand their capacity so it can support more people off the waiting list. That's the crux of it. But yes, you're absolutely right.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for the report. I like your sections around, particularly on LGBT plus support, and obviously we've had a recent upsurge in homophobic attacks in Merseyside. You mentioned about safe spaces for vulnerable people in the nighttime economy. I just wondered if you could expand a bit about what that will look like in practice. And another thing, I suppose, and this comes as well in terms of the modern slavery section that you mentioned. Liverpool and others have obviously welcomed a number of refugees from Afghanistan, and of course we welcome refugees from other parts of the world. But of course, you know, people in a vulnerable position could be more open to these particularly around modern slavery. I wonder what kind of outreach work your office has done, particularly around the new Afghan refugees, to talk about some of these issues. And I suppose the modern slavery, you mentioned about an income generating officer, but has your office done anything in terms of trying to bring in additional income in terms of grants and funding? I know things like Lloyd's, for example, do grants available for modern slavery and things like that. So I just wondered what incomes have been brought in. And I know there's a few questions there, but I'll go for it.
No, that's good. I welcome them all. In terms of the safe spaces, so I'm working with Pride to look at how I think basically the number of it is ultimately we want to stop it happening, and there's a piece of work around education and support in schools and those kind of things, and I think that work's being done with the Bussett Council, and so we're supporting them through that process. But we were very conscious that if something happens, you know, particularly when you're out in the nighttime economy and out in the city centre, is there somewhere safe where you can go, where you can get support? So we've already started doing training with a lot of the bars and the restaurants and the clubs around working with Stop Hate UK. So they're doing lots of training to make sure that if somebody comes in and says, actually, I've just been a victim of hate crime, what support do you need to put in place? Sometimes they want to speak to the police, sometimes they won't, but it's about making sure that the staff there understand where they can signpost people to and how they can best support them. So that work's ongoing really in terms of that training, and we are hoping to launch something more kind of branded once the training's completed. In terms of the modern slavery and in terms of the funding, one of the challenges we have is that as a PCC, as a police commissioner, my office can only bid for certain types of funding. So it tends to be predominantly government funding bids. So that's where we're limited. But one of the things I would like, the income generation officer to do once we get them in is to look at how they can help to promote opportunities, support third sector to maybe put in those bids themselves where we can't do it ourselves, but we're kind of able to try and draw people together. Because I think that's one of the big challenges, that we have lots of really great organisations doing really great work, and they're all kind of bidding for lots of small pots of money, but I'd love us to see it doing it on a bit more of a joined up scale. So where I can, do the funding bid myself or do that piece of work, but I'm also keen to see where we can try and help coordinate, working with the CBSs and things to try and get a more coordinated bid for some of those pots that you talk about. And then yes, in terms of the Afghanistan refugees, yeah, absolutely. My community gated team very much engaged. They're working, reaching out to all the organisations that we know will be supporting refugees and kind of offering support if we can give it.
Councillor Hooton.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Commissioner. I'd like to ask about the Home Office surface streets too. Yeah. So I noticed that Liverpool and Wirral, respectively,
was awarded 387,000 and 432,000. And did the Commissioner's team successfully secure this funding directly? Then ask all 5 local authorities to submit bids, and if so, was only Wirral and Liverpool successful?
I might have to ask Clive or John if you know the detail, because that was slightly before my time, I think, in terms of how they came together.
I think Safer Streets, we did go around making sure that the CPSs were, Community Safety Partnerships, were aware of the fund. One of the requirements of that particular fund is that any bid must come from or be supported by the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. So we work closely with certainly Wirral and Liverpool in this case, and we're successful in drawing down that money. But because we've put the bid and we're the accountable body for it, so obviously we need to make sure that both organisations deliver what they've agreed to. But it's very much, the pot was available, we made sure everyone was aware of it, and we submitted their bids on their behalf. But we made sure those bids met the criteria, because obviously that's part of the challenge. You've got to make sure that it meets the criteria to be successful, and in those cases we were. But we do generally speak to the Community Safety Partnership, make them aware of the pots of money available, and encourage them to bid where it's possible, but then it's not always available.
Would you be at liberty to say which authorities actually did submit a bid?
Certainly, well, I think there was, from memory, I think, I'd have to get back to you on that one, probably best, rather than just saying something incorrectly. But I think that we were in contact with all of them, but unfortunately the timescales allowed, really, that only those 2 really we were able to put forward. But in terms of Safer Streets, there is Safer Streets 2 there, so we've had Safer Streets 1, and we're hoping that Safer Streets 3 will come up shortly. And again, it's about making people sure that the community safety partners are aware of that, so they can start planning the bid. Problem is, the focus slightly changes each round, so it's not always, you know, oh, we did it last time. The government will change the focus of the funding bid.
Okay, thank you very much.
We can certainly go away and see what the final information for you, but yeah, as John says, it's a real challenge, I think, for local authorities to get together bids, because they come through kind of every so often, and you know it's hard. There's a capacity issue for local authorities as well. But we have identified other projects in other areas, so hopefully you'll see that coming through as well in the next few months.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Pickle.
Thank you, Chair. A specific question at this time, mainly because I've had dealings with them in the past. Your report refers to the employment of IDVAs. I'm specifically interested in who will employ them and who they will be accountable to, because by their very nature they are independent, but at the same time my experience has been that without a real accountability, that independence is improperly or can be improperly used.
There's different providers across Merseyside. So in Liverpool, it is Local Solutions. In Knowsley, I think it's direct with the council. I'm trying to remember what the other ones are, but there's different providers in different local authorities that provide it. So, and again, that probably comes down to that monitoring as well. So they manage that process, and the IDVAs will work for that organisation. And then as part of our contract managing process, we will ask for information to see the impact they're having, so we monitor it through that.
Are you happy with that, Mr. Pickle?
Yes, I've got other questions, other parts of the report, but we seem to be focusing on the funding at the moment, so I'll move on to other parts if you wish. Yeah?
Yes, you may as well at this stage, I think.
2 questions then. One in relation to the staffing review. The report is impressive. It's like a horse bolting, doing so much in a short space of time. And as Councillor Rollands said, the question is, can you keep it up? And my question, therefore, is, within your staffing review, where are you at the present time in regard to the question of a deputy? And the second question is, you refer to a robust scrutiny process, and your video referred to my scrutiny board. And I'm a bit confused there, because you've got the scrutiny meetings with the police and with the Chief Constable. You have us as a crime panel who are there to challenge, but also to support you.
Mr. Pickle, I'm dreadfully sorry, and it's my error. I wonder, could we just stay that question, because we actually will come on to that in the next section, and I'm aware that Councillor Schmieder may want to ask a question about the issues that we've just currently been discussing. So I'm dreadfully sorry, it's my fault, but I think it would help the flow of the proceedings if we could just allow Councillor Schmieder to come in, and then we'll move on. No, I'd rather us wait and go back through that if we could. Thank you. Sorry about that. Councillor Schmieder.
Thanks, Chair. Any additional resources towards community policing? Because what I've noticed, especially in my ward, that we've had a massive increase in drug dealing. So I was just wondering whether there's any specific additional funding around that. Thank you.
So one of the challenges that we're facing is that the government have introduced what they're calling Operation Uplift. So the 20,000 police officers that you'll have heard the Prime Minister speak of, they're giving funding, but it's very specific to police officer posts. And they obviously play a role, and they do engage with the community, and they do lots of work. But the PCSOs, the community support officers, who are kind of a really great resource for local communities, they are they're technically classed as police staff because they don't have the same powers. So we're not getting any additional funding specifically for them. And so some of the challenges we're facing is how do we kind of keep those numbers up? And we do have a few vacancies as well at the minute around it, because some of them have gone on to then become police officers. So there's a few challenges around that. So, you know, I'm myself and other PCCs are making the case that we need more funding so that we can invest in all areas, including police staff and PCSOs, but we haven't got anything yet. It might be worth, and I know we're going to come on to scrutiny in a minute, but my first scrutiny meeting next week is all about workforce. So, and it'll be live streamed and available to the public. So one of the questions we're going to be asking is, you know, how do you decide where you put your funding and your resource in terms of where do you invest in your local policing teams versus your kind of, you know, response to firearms discharges or whatever it might be. And so I'm going to try and ask them those questions so the public can see how the police decide where to put their resources, because we know local policing, community policing is a really key priority for people, but we aren't quite getting the funding that we need yet to kind of be able to do as much as we want to do.
Thanks. Councillor Murray, is it to do with funding, or because then we'll move on to the...
No, it's the safe spaces.
Yeah, please, if you go ahead with that then.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Commissioner, I just wanted to check just on the safe spaces in the nighttime economy. I know fire stations used to be safe spaces. Are they still that? And what are the plans maybe to identify other safe spaces that would be there right throughout the evening? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really great point. So the fire stations are all, they call them safe havens. So they are all still safe havens across Merseyside. We do work closely with the fire service, and we are looking at kind of refreshing that, reminding people that support is there, making sure the fire officers based there are able to respond if somebody does come in. I do think there's a really good piece of work here around doing more around safe spaces and identifying, as you say, additional areas where you could go at all times of day and night. It's probably a piece of work that we haven't quite got the capacity to do yet, but it's something I'd like to look into. Even just something very basic like, you know, having an app, you know, where you can just go and say, I need to go to talk to somebody, where can I go? And there's probably lots of different facets of support you'd offer within that. But it's a piece of work that I haven't got to yet, but it's on my list of things I'd like to look at.
Just on that, Commissioner, do the city safe havens, do they still exist? They used to have like illuminated signs outside of buildings. I know it's probably only Liverpool.
Yeah, so I think when the safe havens came in, Liverpool City Safe also introduced safe spaces and kind of linked in on it. I don't think the scheme has been kept up. I think last time I spoke to Liverpool City Council, you need to keep up the training and the investment so that people, if somebody does come, you know you're going to get the right support. But I think that training's fallen off a bit with, you know, austerity and the cuts to the budget and things. So to my knowledge, it's not there yet, or they're not kind of refreshing it at the minute. But they're aware of it, and it's something they might look into. But yeah, you'd have to check with the council, I think.
Thank you. Once again, Mr. Pickup, my apologies. If you'd like to question the Commissioner rather than the Deputy Commissioner, and then we'll move on to the scrutiny issues in the next item. So, if you'd like to go again, sorry about that.
You want me to ask the question again? Yeah. In your staffing review, you didn't refer to the Deputy Commissioner, but in view of the workload that you've currently taken on and following Councillor Rowlands' question, are you at the point of considering a Deputy Commissioner? Because it does seem to me you'll need one.
Yes, I will be getting a Deputy Police Commissioner. I am working on getting my office sorted first, I think, in terms of obviously replacing the Chief Exec and then getting those other additional posts. And I think once that has kind of settled, then I can see, because I don't want to rush ahead with a Deputy Police Commissioner without understanding what kind of person I want and, you know, the particular skills and what they might offer that's additional to what I have. So I'm kind of waiting to see what the office settles as, and then I'll be looking to bring in a Deputy Police Commissioner. So I will be doing one, and needless to say, I will be required to do one in due course. But I'm going to focus on the office staff first, get them settled, and then, yes, I'll put out for that. And obviously the panel will be involved in that process.
Thanks, Commissioner. Any other questions, colleagues, on this part of the agenda? No. Okay. So, subject to our comments being taken on board, are we satisfied with the activity and planned projects that the PCC has been involved in? Unless anyone raises their hand in objection, I'll take it everyone is in support of the action. Thank you. As there are no indications to speak and no objections have been raised, we will record it that the action has been endorsed. Thanks, Commissioner. Colleagues, if we turn to item 3B on the agenda, which is the Commissioner's approach to monitoring police performance, you'll find it at pages 27 to 58. It's monitoring police performance and holding the Chief Constable to account. And I'd like to invite the Commissioner to take us through her report. Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, you'll be aware that one of the key responsibilities for the Police Commissioner is around the scrutiny and holding the Chief Constable to account. So this is just basically a report to kind of identify the different ways that I will do that. There are some similarities to what's come previously, so you can see, for those of you who've been on the panel before, you can see some similarities to what's happened before. Just a couple of the key changes to highlight to you. The formal scrutiny meetings, the first of which I mentioned will be happening next week. The Chief Constable will now be attending that. They didn't previously, but I think it's important the Chief does attend because they're the person that I will be holding to account. You will hopefully also have seen that it is going to be live streamed, so much like this. We'll be live streaming the meeting as well, so the public can see the questions and the conversation that we have. And I've also invited some questions from the public, you know, as part of my commitment to be that voice of the public in policing. I've invited a number of questions from the public, and we'll be asking those as well and putting those to the Chief Constable and her team. As I said, I've also taken the approach that it's going to be focused, so I'm taking more of a thematic approach, because my fear with the previous system is that we wouldn't be able to get into the detail of some of the issues and actually see what the police are doing and what changes they're making and monitoring, you know, kind of their different approaches and things. So, so this one is very much focused around the workforce, around the people. As I say, it's around kind of the diversity, about where they're being placed, what the numbers look like, all of those different issues. And then the subsequent meetings will then focus on the police and crime plan. So my priorities identified within that around you know, visible policing and proactive policing and tackling serious organised crime and those kind of things. In addition to those screening meetings then, obviously there are the other functions. So I have my regular one-to-ones with the Chief Constable. I have those every 2 weeks, and then I make sure that I have a conversation in between that as well. So we are in conversation every week at least. And all of those actions and minutes will then be put on the website. So again, they're kind of out there and transparent for people to see what the issues I'm raising are and what the Chief's response is. And then you've also got there a number of other different areas in terms of audit, the Safe Merseyside Partnership, key decisions and the Business Change Programme that all kind of contribute to that wider scrutiny programme. So yeah, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Before we move to any other questions, I'd just like to invite the webcast operator to speak to us, because I think we're doing something wrong with our buttons. Helen.
Thanks, Chair. So, yeah, it was just a quick one. I think when we move to the next section of questioning, it'll just help the smooth running of the questioning. Just to remind panel members that you only need to press your microphone button once, and that will place you in the queuing system. And you don't need to press the microphone again when you're invited to speak. It will switch on automatically. You only need to switch your microphone off at the very end when you finish talking. So press it once, it'll come on when it's ready, and then only press it when you finish talking. Okay, thank you.
would appear effectively what we're doing is by pressing it again, we're turning ourselves off when we're speaking. So thanks very much for that. We won't let it happen again. I have Councillor Rollands.
Thanks, Chair. Holding the Chief Constable to account, will you be considering this to be in public in future? And will it be increased instead of quarterly to 6 times a year?
Sorry, I missed the first part about public attending, did you say?
Would you consider the holding the Chief Constable to account in public? And can it be increased from quarterly to 6 times a year?
So in terms of the public, that's why I've decided to live stream it. I'm still very conscious of the issues around COVID and maximising, capacity in a room and things like that. So we haven't allowed any physical attendance this time, but we have made sure that we've live streamed it so the public can still access it. And particularly if they've asked a question, they can see their question being asked. In terms of the timescales, I find that there was a lot of work that goes into it, and if you get the chance to see what's the live stream, you'll see how much we ask for from the force in terms of looking at the data. They produce a series of slides that really gets into the detail as to the patterns of crime, the patterns of the data breakdown around the workforce and all those kind of issues. I would be wary about increasing it too often, because I think then there's always a balance there in terms of how much I ask for and put too much pressure on the police to provide a lot of information, and that takes them away from the other work they need to be doing. Having said all of that, I mentioned before I'm keen to get a scrutiny and improvement officer in. I'm keen that they will take a look at the broader scrutiny programme and just see if there is anything that we're missing. I am going to be required to publish certain amounts of information around police performance, some kind of key comments around the kind of data on certain crime types. So one of the things we'll be looking at is how do we get that information from the police, and how do I offer my comments on that and satisfaction if the police are doing enough. So I think there's probably going to be lots of bits coming down the line that we need to probably take a look at and see how we slot it into the programme, and the scrutiny officer will be part of that process. So I suppose the answer to your question, it's not a no, absolutely no way, but I'm mindful of the resource implications, but I think it's all under review, and we'll kind of keep monitoring it as we go forward, and once we get somebody in to look at it in the round, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner, that's lovely.
Commissioner, can I just clarify? Do you see these scrutiny meetings with the Chief Constable, are they going to be thematic, or are they going to be on the general trends of the force? So actually you're being led, the scrutiny is going to be led by what's happening, by demand, rather than thematic. Because we know you've got 6 themes, and I think that's probably why Les was thinking, currently it's quarterly. How would you deal with 6 themes on a quarterly basis?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we're working that out, I think, as part of the phasing. I think we've got a bit of a delayed start because obviously the plan isn't officially signed off yet. So I think this year we'll probably end up covering a couple of themes in one scrutiny meeting. I mean, yeah, being brutally honest, we're still working it out, I suppose, is the honest answer. We're looking at trying to get a kind of a snapshot data picture so that will be publicly available, and the idea will be then I would look at my theme, we'd look into it in a bit more detail, but then I would also be able to look at the data picture and go, right, there's been a big spike here in this particular issue. It's not on the agenda, but I want to bring it in to talk to you about it because there's a concern around it. So I suppose we'll probably end up with a bit of a hybrid model of both. But I was just keen to move away from the previous model where we kind of went through every crime type, every meeting, and never really got into a robust discussion about what action the police are taking. Yeah. So it's probably going to end up being a bit of a hybrid, but we're still working out exactly how that's going to look, if that answers the question. So I can certainly come back to you as it develops.
Thank you. Did you want to come back?
Just a quick follow-up. Obviously, you're inviting questions from members of the public, and the public will ask some questions that maybe cannot be answered. Will that be explained to them at those meetings, why that question can't be answered?
Yeah, we've gone through the questions that have been submitted for this cycle, and there were a couple that were very specific issues, potentially relating to ongoing complaints or, particular incidents that they've experienced, and those aren't the kind of questions that we would be able to ask. So we direct them either to the complaints team within the police, or we look at doing our own kind of, response to them directly. But the questions, there are, to be fair, lots of really good questions the public have submitted, which are about the broader issue around things like diversity, and, policies around tattoos, for example, is one of the specific questions. But yeah, anything that's very specific that isn't appropriate to be asked in a public forum, we take it away and we do go back to them and say, we'll redirect you to this group or whoever it needs to go to.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Pickup.
Thank you. Having attended one of the formerly called force inspection meetings, one of my concerns about the openness that you're introducing is those areas which have previously been covered in the force inspection meetings, which are, in my view, very confidential. Ones where chief officers in the force, and as you will know, quite a number of chief officers attend that meeting, come with information and enter into discussion, usually at the request of the Commissioner, about areas such as discipline, etc., which need, in many ways, to be kept in a pretty confidential frame. Is that likely to mean that the agenda, apart from your own priorities, is that likely to mean that the agenda changes and it prompts many more meetings with officers of the force in order to cover those grounds?
So what's been done previously with those inspection meetings was that there would be a section kind of at the end, a kind of closed agenda section where if there were things that needed to be taken out of the public realm because of the sensitivities around it, they could do that and it wouldn't be minuted and things. So my intention is that if there is anything, and I don't think there is for this first meeting, but you're right, there may be sensitive issues moving forward. My intention is that as part of my scrutiny meeting, there would be a section at the end where we potentially would stop the live stream to avoid any information that shouldn't be in the public domain, allow us to have that conversation. So I can still offer that scrutiny, and then we'd capture what would be appropriate to put in the minutes later on. So there will probably still be, there may still be a restricted section depending on the issue and depending on the content of the theme for that cycle.
And I assume from your openness that you would welcome members of the panel to be present at those meetings.
Yes, so as I say, for this first one, we're limited because of the restrictions on the number of people who can be in the room because of the COVID restrictions. So that's why we're encouraging, we'll send you the link once we have the link and you can absolutely watch it live stream. Once we start allowing people into the room itself, then yes, absolutely, I would very much encourage you to come because I think you'll see a lot then about what I'm actually doing in practice, hopefully.
Councillor Hooton.
One-to-ones with the Chief Constable, have there been any robust pushbacks? And if so, have these interactions led to any changes or alternative approaches?
So, gosh, you'll have to check my memory now. I'm trying to think. There's been a lot of issues that I have raised concerns around. I asked some quite robust questions around the dispersal order, for example, in Liverpool, because there was some anxiety from the public around the use of that. So I was quite robust in, her explanation. I was satisfied with the explanation, but I did ask her lots of questions about that. Some of the other issues, I'm trying to remember now what we've talked about. Safer knives is probably another example that's in there. So there's a proposal to use blunt knives for the initial scheme came in because for young people who might be vulnerable of knife crime and potentially taking knives out of their home to use on the streets, there's a proposal to replace them with blunt knives, so the actual harm you cause is much less. And there's been some success in London around using that scheme. There was a proposal to use that potentially for domestic abuse victims who might be vulnerable to being injured at home or killed. I had some anxieties around that, and I think there was a real concern that that's not the right approach in that particular victim kind of situation. So I've pushed back on that, and that's been put on hold for now while they review the evidence for it. So, yeah, to be honest, there's lots of examples in there, I think, where, I've made a bit of a challenge and the chief has gone away to maybe have another think or feed that back. But I think also, this is the challenge, I think, with this role, is that I am not operational, so I cannot tell the police how to do their job. I cannot tell the Chief Constable how to run her police force. All I can do is ask the questions and hope that some of that feedback is taken on board and just you know, sometimes it's about just offering the public a chance to understand the why they've come to that decision and get some clarity around the process of that decision, rather than necessarily changing the outcome, and that's probably the kind of balance I have really in terms of the role I have. So yeah, but there's lots, I think, in that report that identifies lots of challenge I've offered.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Smeeder.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, I'd just like to ask whether in any of your conversations you had with the Chief Constable, whether there was any talk of setting up any positive action schemes for the recruitment of black officers into the force.
Yeah, great question. I have spoken to the Chief about that before, and there's lots and lots of good work being done, I think, to look at exactly that. There's a discussion around vetting, for example, and looking at whether you need to take another check with vetting to make sure that you're not, you know, unfairly dismissing somebody because of, you know, a past history. This is the kind of conversation that I think we'll probably have at the scrutiny meeting next week, when we talk about diversity and we ask what work they're being done to promote diversity within the recruitment. So there'll probably be more information that comes out of that conversation that I can certainly feed back, or indeed, if you want to watch, you'll hear it there, hopefully.
Thanks, Councillor Smeeder. Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have any other questions? No. Well, subject to any... I beg your pardon. Sorry, Mr. Pickup.
Sorry, Chair. I'll go back to my original question on scrutiny. The report refers to various developments of scrutiny, and your video refers to my scrutiny board.
Yes.
That causes me some confusion because there's obviously a lot of discussion in your report about scrutiny and the existing bodies and the changes there. What do you actually mean by my scrutiny board, and why, in that sense, is it needed in addition to what you've already got, including ourselves?
Yes, you did ask that question before. So just to clarify, when I talk about my scrutiny board, I'm talking about the scrutiny meeting. So the meeting I'll be holding next week is my scrutiny meeting. And when I talk about a scrutiny board, my intention is, as I've said before, as one person, I'm very conscious that I cannot accurately kind of reflect the experiences of everybody across Merseyside. So my intention is to recruit some independent voices to sit on that meeting with me. So when I sit down with the Chief Constable and the senior officers, I will have other colleagues from different walks of life, different experiences, different backgrounds, who can offer a different perspective, and will kind of add a different voice to that scrutiny and that challenge. So it's not about an additional meeting, it's about trying to bring in some independent voices to sit with me when I have those public scrutiny meetings, just to offer a new perspective, to make sure that we're asking all the right questions.
Well, in that case, I need to ask, how are they selected, and how might you involve the panel in that process?
It's a good question, and again, that's on my list of things for the scrutiny officer to think about once we recruit someone. I haven't got any firm ideas around how we do that, so I'd welcome a conversation if the panel have particular ideas around how we get an independent voice. So I can certainly come back to you if you have thoughts about that. Once I've got this staff member in place, they'll be leading on that project, so happy to come back to you with that.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think just on that point, I think the panel is here not just to scrutinise and hold the Commissioner to account, but to assist you in performance of your role. So I think I get a sense in discussing with colleagues that the panel would welcome an opportunity to have some input into any scrutiny board or whichever way you see that. We'll have a conversation about that, Commissioner.
Yeah, well, as I say, yeah, more than happy to come back and have a further conversation, yeah.
Anybody else?
So can I come back to that? Just because it's been missed somewhere along the line, I need to refer back to review of community safety funding. Sorry, it was missed, Chair. And you refer to community safety funding and the possible review, and I think the Chief Executive's involvement in looking at that. The panel has specifically requested that two of its members be involved in that process. Are you still committed to that?
Yes, I think we've got that under the governance arrangements, but yes, we are. It's a bit of a moving, there's lots of moving parts around the funding, so we've been kind of looking at various issues to try and work out the scope of the funding review. But we are now drafting those terms of references now. So yes, you'll absolutely still be involved. I think it was yourself and Councillor Ashton who'd expressed an interest. So yes, and we'll be coming back to you shortly. It's just one of those things that we know we need to do. It's just getting the right, bits together to make it happen. But yes, you'll absolutely be involved in that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pickup. Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have any other questions for Commissioner on this item? No. Well, subject to any comments and queries being taken on board, are we satisfied with the effectiveness of the mechanisms utilised by the Commissioner in holding the Chief Constable to account and scrutinising the performance of Merseyside Police? Unless anyone indicates to speak in objection, I will take it that we are satisfied. Yep, thank you. So as there are no indications to speak in objection, it will be recorded that that section has been endorsed. Item 3C, colleagues. Our next item is the Police Commissioner decisions. Commissioner, would you please take us through the report? You'll find this at pages 59 to 60 on the agenda.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So there's 4 decisions there. I'm happy to take any questions, really. I think the details in the report, but happy to answer any questions about them.
Thank you, Commissioner. Does anybody have any questions on this item? No? Subject to any comments and queries being taken on board, then I'll be happy to endorse the decisions made by the Commissioner since our last panel meeting. We have no objections to that, so as there are no objections and no indications to speak, it will be recorded that we are satisfied with the decisions taken by the Commissioner. Item 4, our next item is an update on our comments and recommendations from the previous meeting. Commissioner, would you like to take us through the report, which colleagues can find at 61 to 64 on the agenda?
Yes, again, thank you, Chair. So I think the remaining kind of outstanding issues, the first one was around the reporting mechanism for monitoring the performance of the force. So as I say, we'll be releasing more information to the public anyway around data, and you'll have the opportunity to watch the live stream scrutiny meeting. So hopefully that will, go some way to satisfying that query. The victim services grant, there's a detailed explanation there. I know Councillor Ashton raised it last time around how the original split of funding was established. So there's an explanation there about how that was done. And then the final bit was what we've just been discussing in terms of the community safety funding, which we're still committed to involving colleagues in. So I'll come forward with that once we have the terms of reference.
Thank you, Commissioner. Colleagues, do you have any questions or comments on this? So unless anyone indicates to speak in objection, I'll take it that we are satisfied. And as there are no indications to object, it will be recorded. We're happy with the Commissioner's responses. Commissioner, if you wish your staff to leave at this point, you're quite welcome to do so. Thank you. Thank you to you and your staff for your participation. Right, thanks very much, colleagues. We're still on live stream. Item 5 is the monitoring of conduct matters and complaints against the relevant office holders, which you'll find at pages 65 to 68. Runs from March 2021 to August 2021. It's our final item. It's the first twice yearly updates on the panel's monitoring of conduct matters and complaints against relative office holders. And I'd like to invite Mr. Moran to take us through that report.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, this is a report that's produced twice a year for the panel give an update on the responsibilities that the panel has delegated down to the monitoring officer of the host authority to handle complaints against relevant office holders. And just to remind panel members that relevant office holders are limited to the Commissioner and any Deputy Commissioner that the Commissioner seeks to appoint. So there is a summary in terms of some correspondence that the monitoring officer and her team have had in section 4 of the report with 2 potential complainants, and each of those instances it was judged that there was no valid complaint against a relevant office holder, and both those complainants were informed of that particular outcome. But the correspondence can, on occasions, continue in these instances, but that message will continue to be reiterated to those particular complainants, unless they submit something new. And again, we will be obliged on your behalf to examine any submissions that they put to us and judge it accordingly. So that is the detail really, Chair, in terms of outlining what has been handled in section 4 of the report. So we're just asking you to endorse the progress that has been made in handling potential complaints and commit to receive another update from ourselves in your March meeting next year. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, David. Do we have any comments or questions on that aspect? So, panel members happy to endorse the progress in relation to the handling of complaints and conduct matters during the period of March 2021 to August 2021, and agree that a further updated complaint handling be submitted to the meeting of this panel in March 2022. Yep, that's agreed. So as there are no indications to speak and no objections, it will be recorded that we are happy to endorse these actions. Thank you.
Chair, just before you move on to closing the meeting, I'm conscious that the panel have been made aware today of the Chief Executive's sort of leaving his role, and I don't know whether, with this being the last meeting that the Chief Executive is going to be in attendance of the panel in that role, whether you want to mark that in any way.
I was going to address that, perhaps even when the live stream ended, because I was so intent on doing this, I didn't actually catch whether the Commissioner officially announced that Clive was retiring from his role. So at the end, when he got up, I was aware that we hadn't mentioned it, but I didn't want to mention it because I wasn't sure whether she mentioned it. So that's...
Chair, it was mentioned.
No, I appreciate that, but I clearly did not catch that. So what I was proposing to ask at the end of the meeting was that we record our thanks to Clive and our best wishes to him. And I wonder whether we could actually pen a letter to him to record the panel's appreciation of the work he's done in the past and our thanks. So that it's recorded in the minutes and a letter as well.
Yeah, more than happy to do that on the panel's behalf, Chair.
And obviously you speak to Clive, if you would tell him, give him my apologies. I actually didn't catch whether the Commissioner had mentioned it or not, so that was why I was a bit reticent. Okay. Yeah, I had spoken to him outside, so I knew he was retiring. Anything else, anybody? No? So, as we have no other items of an urgent nature, I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance and declare the meeting closed. Thank you.